Hello, everybody. I'm Jeanette Horn of Key Performance Ideas. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Process Engineering and Change Management, presented by Adam Scheinkopf. Adam is a business and technology professional, having worked with large international Fortune 500 organizations in many industries. Adam has helped clients achieve success in their projects by extending their focus beyond the technology solution to include all the organizations and all the business processes impacted by the proposed changes. Not only have the immediate projects been more successful because of including effective process design, but the shift in mindset to embracing change has led organizations to actively seek opportunities to improve their operational effectiveness even after the initial projects have been completed. Thank you for joining us today, Adam. We're looking forward to your insights on process engineering and effective change management.
Great. Thank you, Jeanette. So to kind of set the stage for today, here's the agenda of what we're going to be covering. We're going to start out with some common project pitfalls, which are really examples of some of the issues you may be facing today or have seen in the past. It's also going to give you an overview of what we're going to cover throughout the rest of the material. Today's situation, really how things are being done today, and then what's different goes into the approach that we're going to lay out. The case in point section is really an example of how these concepts have been applied before, so you can see what to expect. A change management, kind of a best practice overview, the expected benefits of using these approaches, and then finally we'll conclude with how to get started. So common project pitfalls. Hopefully some of these seem familiar. You've heard of these. You've experienced them yourselves. The first one here. Efforts are focused primarily on technology improvements without really thinking about the process and the organizational impact. Oftentimes a technology is selected and then the project gets kicked off, but all of the processes and all of the organization elements are not included in that effort. A project tries to introduce too much change and ultimately people are so confused and overwhelmed they're not quite sure what to do, which leads to limited success. The focus is placed really on implementation, and then as soon as it's done, the team kind of disappears and goes away and works on other things, and you're kind of left, what do I do now? And then finally, the justification oftentimes seems the latest and greatest technology, the newest version, without really understanding the business value. So if any of these sound familiar, we're going to be discussing these and more as we move on in this presentation. So here's a little cartoon to kind of get this started. I'm not going to read this to you verbatim, but really when you look at it specifically in the middle here, can a business-led project management process optimize our strategic core issues? When you think about change, when you think about implementations, it's really an art. There's an art and science to doing this. And if you're using fancy terms, if you're using terminology that people don't understand, it's going to be very hard for people to get excited, for people to want to help, and for people to really be ready to embrace that change. So the standard technology project lifecycle. A project begins, requirements get defined, a tool is selected, a design is put in place for that technology, the application is developed or coded, users get trained on the application, the project gets launched, and then it's transitioned to a support organization, and then the project has been completed. What's different about what we're going to talk through today is integrating an approach. So when we talk about technology, that's still clearly a fundamental piece of it, but thinking about the people and the process, so that organization that wraps around this whole process, and thinking about the impact of change are really where this becomes different from a standard technology implementation. I like to group the four major phases for a project as follows. An assessment phase where you're really looking at where are you today? What is the current state of your organization? Where do you want to be? And that's the evaluation phase, or the to be. The implementation phase, or the action. And then ultimately, if not the most important piece, is the end. Once you've deployed a solution, looking at ways to immediately start improving and preparing for improvements in the future. So continuous improvement. As I go through these different phases, you're going to notice items in bold. Those are really the projects or the areas that are different from a standard technology implementation, and that's really where I'm going to focus. So the assessment phase, the current state. You're developing that current state system, so understanding what you got today, but also looking at the process, the data, the organization. How does this all flow together with where you are today? Not just from a tool perspective, but again, that business process that the tool is enabling. As you're thinking about the issues you're facing today, what are the process issues? What are the organizational challenges that are in place today that you want to improve on tomorrow? And then as you're thinking about those issues, also looking at opportunities, both technical and non-technical. And as you have all those opportunities, the issues, and you know where you are today, it's starting to come up with projects, again, focus on people, process, and technology to get you where you want to be. That leads into the evaluation, or the to-be state. Now that you know where your problems are, where your opportunities are, how are you going to get there? What should that look like? What is that future state environment? Again, and you're going to hear a theme throughout this entire presentation, this is not just technology focused. What should the process look like? How should people work together? What should the roles be? How should data flow? All those pieces come together in an integrated target environment. You're looking at your system capabilities and understanding and identifying what can and can't be done, and then looking again back to those opportunities you developed as you're looking at your current state, and you're prioritizing those. Now that you know what the future environment should look like, what's going to get you the most bang for the buck? What order should you go in? What is the most critical, fundamental piece in order to be successful? And that should be first. And then another piece here that is very often overlooked is, what does success look like? Is success for your organization putting in the technology and saying you completed it, you came in under budget, on time, that was success? Or is it actually having a benchmark you're trying to get to? Reducing cycle time, improving your forecast accuracy, enabling people to be better business partners. How do you measure success? And that's really critical to think about before you start coding anything. Identifying those measures, and as important, what is the benchmark you're going to compare against? And then finally, coming up with the plan. How are you going to get there? What resources do you need? How long is it going to take you? The action stage. This is where you have your plan in place and you start executing against it. You're implementing those process changes. You're thinking about the organization structure. You're getting approval to make changes if needed. You're putting those performance measures in place. You're doing the coding on the system. And then finally, once it's complete, looking at what you put in place. Is it successful? And again, how do you measure that success? You're looking back at the benchmark you had for where you were before you started down that journey and comparing now that you have your new system in place 1 month, 3 months down the road. Are we meeting our expected goals? Is our metric on track? How are we going to improve it now that we have this fancy new business process, our organization is better aligned, and we have this great new tool? How are we going to keep improving it? Are we going to form a center of excellence? Are we going to have a user community who's going to funnel in requests? How are we going to measure that, and how are we going to prioritize when those items come in? And then when you look back to your initial list of opportunities, you tackled some with this implementation, and you had others on the list. Where do they fit now? How do you reprioritize them? And then again, back to a cycle. This should be an ongoing cycle. Just because you finished the initial implementation doesn't mean you're done. You need to always look for ways to continue improving. And that's easy to say. That's how it's supposed to be. Let me walk you through an example of how this actually works. So working with a large international automotive manufacturer, to give you a little context on this organization, they had many different business units, and each business unit had its own leadership with their own specific goals and objectives. They had their own measures. They had their own metrics, their own performance targets. They all were incented a little bit differently. So they basically, while they were a corporation of multiple business units, each business unit was essentially its own organization. They had a centralized FP&A group, and that FP&A group worked with local FP&A staff at each of their locations. And they had a history of doing very large, long, extensive technology implementations, primarily focused with a corporate mandate. Corporate identified the tool, corporate identified any process that went with it, and basically told each organization, each business unit, how it was supposed to operate. And in this example, they wanted to put in place a new integrated and robust reporting, budgeting, planning, and analytics environment that could consolidate multiple systems, multiple business processes, and give them a kind of a one-stop shop for planning, budgeting, forecasting, and reporting. The way we went about that is back to that example we walked through earlier in those different phases. The first thing we did is understood where they were. What was the current state? What was manual? what was automated, how were people working together, and then figured out where they wanted to go. What should that target future environment look like? And the big difference here is it was no longer corporate dictating what that should look like. It was working with each of the business units, getting them at the table to come up with requirements. What did they need? And ultimately, if the business units got what they need, corporate's going to get what they need as well. Looking across the different business needs from each business unit, prioritizing what is most important for each business unit because they had different goals, and making sure that those business units got their top priorities addressed first, and looking across all those priorities to find out the synergies and the differences and work through them appropriately to make sure that when we look at the change to each group, it would be manageable and they'd be excited about it because it was attacking their pain points. We came up with a multi-year, multi-phase roadmap. Again, we knew where they wanted to go from a future environment perspective. Again, people, process, and technology. And because each business unit had its own priorities, they fit differently in the roadmap. So it was very easy to tell business unit 1, here are the changes we're going after first. We're going to give you a better forecasting system, whereas business unit 2 needed a better profitability tool. So we could show them, you're going to get this tool first, but here's what's going to come next, and here's what to expect, so that when people started pushing back and saying, I want that as well, it was very easy to say, this is what you're going to get, but this is the order you're going to get it in. And then from a tool perspective, we chose Hyperion's EPM suite as it met their technology needs, and it also really was enabling them to make business process changes to meet those needs. So what were the outcomes of that? Right from the get-go, by understanding where they were and deciding how to get there and what that future environment should look like, there was a very easily understood roadmap that clearly articulated the budget, the timing, the resources needed, that senior leadership all the way down to the analyst who's going to be impacted could understand what does it mean for me? What's it going to take? How am I going to get there? What's this ultimately going to do for my day-to-day job? How is it going to be different? Integrated process and technology changes were implemented, and they benefited not just the company, but again, each business unit. It was no longer corporate telling them what they had to have. It was corporate working hand in hand, and the solutions that were being implemented were implemented in the order that each business unit wanted. Some of the examples that they saw from these tools and these process changes were increased forecast accuracy, standardization and consistency across the business units by going on common platforms, tools, and business processes, better visibility to profitability, and better management reporting capabilities, as well as analytics. Impacted employees, this is one of the biggest changes they saw. People knew what to expect. They weren't just told at the end, here's your new system, go to it. It was, hey, I've always had this pain point. Can you help me address that? And coming up with solutions that addressed their needs, and therefore they were excited and ready to go when the changes came about. And ultimately, as part of this process, enabled by these new tools, the business became much more involved and accountable and able to manage their own environment. The tools and the processes were really owned by the business, and while there's still technology and still have some IT needs, it was much less reliance on the IT organization, and the business really took much more ownership in what they got. So when we talk about change, I like to go with an 8-step approach for managing change. Very, very basic. These 8 steps are easy to remember, and each one is a very clear, and they build on each other, and all it takes is 8 steps to be successful. The first one, establish a sense of urgency. In today's corporate environment, it's very competitive. We've got a global landscape, new players coming in every day trying to take away your business, and if a company is going to sit still and think that what they've got today, it's worked for them in the past and it's going to work for them tomorrow, unfortunately, they're sorely mistaken. You've got to always be looking for ways to continue making change and make sure that that is always at the forefront. You got to stay ahead of your competition. Form a powerful guiding coalition. I'm sure most of you have individuals in your companies that whenever there's a problem, you've got a go-to person. Either that guy or that girl who, when there's an issue, you don't know how to do something, you don't know why something's been done, those are the people who really have the answers. And that's the group you need to really get together and get them on board and make sure they understand what you're trying to do and really get their support, because ultimately, whether it's formalized or informalized, those are the resources who really get things done and people look to. So getting them on board as part of your kind of coalition for change is critical to being successful. Creating a vision. So we talked about a roadmap, we talked about that vision and that integrated kind of planning concept. Having that vision is clear to make sure people see what's coming. If you can show that you've created a vision, you know where you're going, you have a strategy clearly defined, others can understand it, and they can believe you can really make that change a reality. Communication. When it comes down to it, change management is all about communication. It's about making sure you're delivering the right message at the right time to the right person, and ultimately delivering that message over and over and over until it's very clearly understood what it means for them and how they're going to be impacted. Empowering others to act. Once you've identified people and it's become a priority and you started communicating what it is, you communicate the strategy, and people understand that change is coming, you've got to enable them to be successful. I'm sure many of you have been involved on a project where you've got a full-time job and now you're added to a project team that's supposed to only take you 2 hours, that turns into 10 hours, that turns into 20 hours, and you know if you're not participating in that, it's going to impact you down the road, but you still have your day job to do. It's making sure that those roadblocks are removed, that people can get the job done that they already have, and that they can be successful and help you in the long term. Short-term wins. That is really how you build momentum. The first thing to do in any big program as you're building a strategy is come up with quick and easy things that can be done, whether it's eliminating a spreadsheet, whether it's opening up communication, whether it's adding a field to a template, or building a new report, or changing your business process so a document gets sent 2 days earlier. Finding those quick wins, get people excited. It builds momentum, it builds credibility for your change, and it makes them realize you're serious, you mean business, and you can actually get the job done. I'm sure almost everybody on this call has experienced a time where you've been told X system is going to be decommissioned or a new function is going to be added, and it's probably the third or fourth or fifth or even 10th time it's been tried. When you start showing those quick wins, it really starts building to that credibility that, hey, maybe this is different this time. Consolidate improvements and produce more change. So let those quick wins, again, generate that momentum and get people excited. And the last item in here is don't declare victory too soon. Just because the solution has been deployed, you hit your timeline, people are using the new system, doesn't mean you're successful. Again, it's using that benchmarking. It's using the metrics to actually track how are we performing? Are we doing what we expected? And letting people, let them start getting excited and build that momentum for you, build that success, and let them know, hey, this really is what I expected. And then institutionalize the new approaches. Once you go through an effort that kind of breaks the mold a little bit around change, and people see success, they see a strategy was built and it actually got implemented, they see that they were promised a change and that change was made, they're going to see that this is a new way of thinking, and it's okay to think that way. It's okay to actually be optimistic now and realize, hey, we can make a difference, and things can get better. I can have a better work-life balance, and they're going to want to participate in your efforts. They're going to seek this out in the future and say, how can I be a part of it? I want to help make that change as well. What are some of the benefits of doing these activities? You can gain operational efficiencies, reduce your cycle times, automate and therefore minimize some manual efforts, and ultimately, when it comes down to it, if you're investing heavily in a technology, it's going to help you leverage that technology to the fullest extent possible. You're not just buying the new system and putting it in. You're taking advantage of the workflow, the automation, the task list, the ability to build detailed instructions, whatever that tool may be. You're able to really take full advantage of it and really harness the power of that application. The work can pay for itself. So by justifying, hey, I'm going to build a strategy, I'm going to have a roadmap, I'm going to get people excited, it's ultimately going to save you time and money in the long run because people are going to be on board. They're going to be bought in. It's going to make training a lot easier. It's going to make it so you can actually have people focused in the right areas. You don't necessarily have to add headcount every time you want to make a change. You can get people really focused on where they need to be at the right time. Identify the challenges or the pain points before making changes. A lot of times people say they want the latest version of a system, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you don't fix the problems you have in your current system, you're now going to have the same problem in the fancy new tool. So really thinking about the issues you've got from a process standpoint, from an organizational standpoint, whatever it may be in your current environment, and thinking about ways to address that and making that part of the solution as opposed to, again, migrating that to your new system. Helps with developing the roadmap. So as you think about, again, where you're going, doing one project with 5 others to come, if you can think about up front how those 5 fit together, it can help you save money. It can ensure that the priorities and your business needs are always the ones driving your changes. It can, again, get people excited. You're hopefully hearing a lot of themes and patterns here that by thinking up front about change, by thinking about ways to group projects and programs and get people excited, it makes it a heck of a lot easier, and it really sets that stage for the future. Providing a clear interface between business and technology. That is a very, very common pain point across all businesses. Really doesn't matter the size or the industry of how does the business and how does technology work together. They've got different goals. They have different priorities, different metrics. Putting together an integrated program, putting together change management where people think about the impacts, and having a team of business and technology professionals really helps bridge that gap, gets people working together more, gets them excited to work together, and now you have a liaison. You know who to go to, not just for that project, but going forward, you've built those relationships, you've built that credibility, and people are a lot more excited to work together after they've worked on projects like this. And then finally, senior leadership, management, all the way up and down the chain are prepared for your process, they're prepared for your organization, and they're prepared for your system changes. And again, not just prepared, but they're ready, willing, and able to participate. So with that being said, how do you get started on going down these paths? The first thing to do is identify where you want to focus. If you have an organization where everything is perfect except 1 or 2 areas, now you know where to focus. If you've got 20 things you want to improve on, it's identifying all those 20 things and starting to prioritize what is our biggest issue. If we fix this, what else can get fixed downstream? Or if this doesn't get addressed today, is that okay if I wait 3, 6, 12, 4 years, whatever the case may be? What is the priority for me? Why are the activities needed? Why do you want to embark on a process change, on a system change? Is the goal to improve people's work-life balance? Is it to let your resources act as better business partners? Is it to reduce the time they spend doing transaction processing? Are you trying to save money through headcount changes? Are you trying to expand your operations? Are you about to make an acquisition or divestiture? Why are you going to make changes? And if the answer is simply we want to be on the newest version of a technology you're on, that's fine too. But understanding that up front makes it a lot easier to plan. And then determine what the documentation is you have in place for your current state. If you have nothing, fine. Just find out who it is that knows the process. If you've got training manuals, if you have design documents, that's great. Are they updated? Have they been updated since the system was implemented 10 years ago? Just trying to get an inventory of where things are today makes it a lot easier to plan for the change for tomorrow. Identify those resources who know the situation. Again, as we talked about earlier, you've probably got those go-to people who really understand what's going on today. And what we find a lot is a lot of times management believes the process goes one way and the system is being used in one way. But if you actually talk to the people using that system, hitting the keys, they do it very differently. And the automated processes that everybody speaks of aren't really used. It's the multiple Excel files that are getting passed back and forth that are really the backbone of a process. Decide where it fits against your other priorities. So Is this something that needs to be done before your annual plan? Is it something once you have finished the close process you want to start talking about? Again, if you have an acquisition coming up, is it something? Are these activities? Is there a process change you need to make? Are there system implementations you need to get done before that acquisition? And then finally, what is the right time frame? Do you work on the summer? Do you start these activities in the summer because that's when people are at the slow time? Do you do it during the close process? Do you do it after the close process? Is it part of your planning process? What works best for your organization to really start asking these questions, identifying the people, and figuring out where you want to go? And then as you probably mentioned or probably noticed as I was walking through this, I strongly recommend focusing on the process and the impacts of change before going into any technology implementation. Even if you know what the system's going to be and what version you want to be on, that's fantastic. But really look at where you are today from a process standpoint and from an organizational standpoint and make sure you've started fixing or identified the areas you want to fix before moving into that system implementation. And then finally, key performance ideas. We're an Oracle Gold partner specializing in Hyperion, and the framework we just talked through from the roadmap perspective, from the change perspective, process engineering, this is a part of our standard project model. So really, how can we help you in this journey? With that, I'm going to open this up for questions. And if you'd like to ask a question, go to the Viewing Presenters application section, select the blue Q&A icon, and a Q&A box will appear, and then type in your question and send it to all panelists. Okay. First question I have here is, how long does a typical project take? And that is a fantastic question. I wish there was a cookie-cutter answer I could give, but unfortunately I can't because it really varies based on a variety of activities and needs. The level of commonization and standardization, what do you want to undertake? Are you looking at changing your FP&A processes? Are you looking at building a new accounting close process? Are you looking at an entire end-to-end transformation, or are you looking at one small component by adding reports? We talked about documentation from a current state perspective. Is it up to date? Do you have anything? Do you have people who really know the processes and the tools? Have you had a lot of turnover and you're kind of starting from scratch? All those factors really play in to understanding how long something like this is going to take and what the effort would be from a resource perspective. How do you get your management to see the value in this? I think the first thing you need to do is really talk about how implementations have worked in the past. Have they been fantastic? Do people think every project you're doing is wonderful? And if so, you've got a great process. You should be very proud of that process. If you've seen in the past that people don't really get engaged and you get to the end of an implementation and it's kind of a mad scramble to get them trained, then you need to talk about how having better engagement and getting people excited about a process change and getting them on board from day one can really benefit them. You could also focus on the need for putting in place a roadmap so that everybody understands how the pieces are going to fit together for a project. And then finally, from a technology perspective, every organization has a technology budget and a plan for capital expenditures. How do you make sure you're going to leverage that technology to its fullest extent? If you're going to make the investment, how do you want to make sure that you're really using it as much as you possibly can and taking full advantage of a system like that? I have another one that came in. Do you need a dedicated resource manager to focus on change management on a project team? That is a really great question. It really depends on the skill set of your teams. If you have resources who understand how to make change and how to drive for change, then that can be a part of their responsibilities. If you have a very large-scale project that's impacting many, many users, and you have a team that hasn't really done this before or doesn't feel comfortable or is overwhelmed and has other activities they need to do, having a dedicated change person makes a lot of sense. It's really all about having a resource that understands what it means to implement change. That person's got to understand how to effectively communicate, has to understand how you identify stakeholders, how you put together a plan, the right kind of tools to use when you send an email versus using a survey, and just making sure you have the right resources engaged. It can be an existing team member, it could be a project manager, it could be a business analyst, or a dedicated person. It really depends on the team makeup.